response. I believe if Trump had come out for, say, stronger lockdowns, even let's say that's bad public policy, but I think it would have been a winning political policy. We saw Gavin Newsom resoundingly defeat the recall. Gavin Newsom was the first person to lock down a state. He locked down California in reaction to COVID. I think that Americans, by and large, had more of an appetite for more restrictions than even their government gave them. And so I think it's interesting, in contrast to freedom lovers, that I think, by and large, the average American wanted even stricter government responses to COVID. The average Australian, by and large, as I understand it, has supported these very stringent reactions, and people often value things more than, and so I just find that fascinating.
In America, the closest thing to the fairness ethic you referred to in Australia is the concept of a square deal, but that really pertains to business, whereas in Australia, as you mentioned, it's more of a cultural thing. And certainly, I think the Australian and New Zealander devotion to the concept of fairness as a cultural identifier, not just as something that's a good practice, is something that's not even seen to that extent in the UK. And I think you mentioned that as well. It's something unique to Australia and New Zealand on the basis of what these societies came out of. And in the case of Australia, obviously, it was a penal colony. So the people there were going to have a big appetite for what they would perceive as fairness or compassion, that sort of thing. Now, looking at America, it did come out of the Enlightenment era, of course, whereas Australia and New Zealand were post-Enlightenment. But judging from what you've said in your analysis of America's desire for stronger lockdown policies, and this is a general thing for what you're saying, obviously doesn't mean all Americans are going to want this. But it sounds like you categorize Americans as being more freedom-loving than fairness-loving. But on the basis of your perspective on what they want with these COVID lockdowns, it sounds like they're not really all that much interested in freedom. They would much rather have the Australian or New Zealander perspective here, that fairness standpoint. So perhaps then one could say that in analyzing your argument, that as you compare American freedom to Australian fairness, nowadays that's not even an apt comparison in terms of what most people in America.
Yeah, I think America is probably less freedom-loving today than 20 years ago, in part because the demographics have changed. But also, rhetoric can hang on after its reality on the ground has diminished. So we still have tremendous American rhetoric about freedom when perhaps that doesn't reflect on the ground reality as, say, it used to. And then it also brings up the vision of the dissident right and where it differed from, say, Republican free market principles, and where paleoconservatism differs from free market conservatism is that paleocons and distant right, they don't put necessarily the market first. They want the market to serve the people rather than the people serving the market. So if you're looking for a coherent society with higher levels of social trust, where people basically trust their government and have good reason for believing that the government is attempting to act in their best interests, and the people collectively are willing to make substantial sacrifices in their individual freedom for the collective good, then perhaps there's something to be learned from Australia, because the individualistic, free market approach is not the dissident right approach. The dissident right, the paleocons, we want to call back to a higher sense of community and more willingness to give up some of our individual freedoms for the sake of more communal feeling and more communal participation and a greater sense of cohesiveness and trust with our fellow citizens. So even if it increases the GNP 10% to import a million extra immigrants because of the decrease to social trust and social cohesion from a trad right perspective, that would not be worth it. We don't worship the god of GNP. And so even if certain government policies, perhaps even these COVID restrictions, which reduce the GNP far more than, say, a free market approach, but if this is in the collective self-interest, if protects lives, perhaps there's something to be learned, even if these policies are wrong. Perhaps there's something to be learned from the willingness of Australians to forego certain individual liberties for the sake of the health of the